We are Rogue Media Sports.
Have you ever brought your magic to Walt Disney World like, hey, we came to play? Did you tip your tiara to a Creole princess or get goofy officially? Step up like a boss and save the day? Or see what life's like under the tree of life? Did you? If you could. Would you? When we come through, it's true magic. 'Cause we came to play. Bring the magic at Walt Disney World Resort.
With the Wells Fargo Active Cash Credit Card, you can earn unlimited 2% cash rewards on purchases you want and purchases you need. That means you earn on what you want, like trying out that new workout class, and 2% cash rewards on what you need, like a foam roller for your sore muscles. That's the beauty of the Active Cash Credit Card. It's ready when you are, with unlimited 2% cash rewards. The Wells Fargo Active Cash Credit Card. That's real life ready. Terms apply. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/activecash.
It is the Doomsday podcast live from AT&T Stadium, and just in the aftermath, about an hour after the ball game now has ended, and after hearing from all the main parties, this is an interesting one, and Ed Werder alongside as always. And Ed, I would just say this is not what we expected. Cowboys favored by 17, which is an enormous number when it comes to NFL lines. And, of course, they did not live up to it. And it took until the final minute for them to, or within the, under a minute left to escape 27-23. And, Ed, we'll get into how this game unfolded. But elsewhere, the Eagles just kind of continued to do what they do. And in contrast to the Cowboys, took care of business on their march to having the number one seed in the NFC.
Yeah, the Cowboys in an eyesore victory of sorts. Nonetheless, a milestone. Mike McCarthy, his coaching staff and players have now won 10 or more games in consecutive seasons for the first time since Chan Gailey in 1995-1996. And they did it despite Dak Prescott missing 5 consecutive starts because of that fractured thumb on his passing hand in the season opener. But the Eagles own the day. They're the first team in the NFL to clinch a playoff spot. This is the third time they've clinched a playoff spot with 4 or more games remaining in a season. And each of the other times, or they made the Super Bowl in 2 of those other seasons, 1980 and 2004. The last 2 weeks, the Eagles have won. They beat the Titans by 25. They beat the Giants today, 48-22. They're the 5th team since 1970 to win back-to-back games by 25 or more points against teams that had a winning record at the time they played them. The others being the 2020 Bucks, the 2019 Ravens, the 2010 Patriots, the 1996 Packers. And so the Eagles, on a day where the Cowboys showed their vulnerability, the Eagles remain dominant. They have an NFL best now, surpassing the Cowboys. NFL best plus 138 point differential and the league's best record at 12-1. So that means they would have to lose 2 of their final 4 games against the Bears, Cowboys, Saints, and Giants not to win the division and get a bye. And if they lose to Dallas in week 16 at AT&T Stadium on Christmas Eve, but win their other 3 games, they'll still win the division and be the number 1 seed and send the Cowboys on the road in the wild card round.
All right. It is the Doomsday podcast brought to you by Marable Homes. Thank you, Blake Marable. Thank you for what you do. And more on Marable Homes. Boy, those custom homes, gorgeous in the Lake Highlands area, into Preston Hollow, and now kind of spreading through Dallas. We're talking about luxury homes and just an unbelievable job that Marable Homes does for their clients. And in fact, that's why second, third homes, they always get repeat business because of how they treat people. Marable Homes, the title sponsor of the Doomsday podcast. We've got analysis from Ed Werder. We've got the grades from Glenn Stretch Smith. We have Jerry Jones commentary. It's all next. Frito, if you would, please play the music. All right, there it is. And I'm looking out over the field as we speak.
With your sunglasses on.
You're
like prime time. Deion Sanders going to basketball games at night, standing at the Folsom Field 50-yard line in the dark, wearing his sunglasses. That's you and Deion.
That's the way I'm the most comfortable. And if Deion wants to copy me, that is fine. No worries with that. But Deion,
pull up your hoodie.
I know that's a school near and dear to your heart, having spent so much time in Colorado and having covered that program at one point. At least, I don't know, he may, we'll see, he may drive it into the ditch, but it's already in the ditch. So at least they'll be relevant. I don't think it can go any lower, so it'll be fun to see what Deion, very famous Hall of Famer and former Cowboy, will do. Now, Ed Werder, as we kind of start to break this thing down, I just want to work through a couple of facets of this thing. And I think a lesson you learned early in your writing career, especially covering Elway, when in doubt, write or talk about the quarterback. And I got to say, just having visited with Jerry after the ball game, now Jerry's doing the whole, I'm only going to look at that 98-yard drive. Ed, you might remember Elway having a drive like that. It's a little more.
I do
important.
really. Cleveland sent him to their first Super Bowl. Yeah, I do remember something like that.
A little more important that drive than this drive, but still, Cowboys win a game that for much of the day they seemed intent on losing. And Ed, it's always interesting to me when one of the players that quite honestly helped put them in the position, when he then helps save them, we got to kind of work through that. Jerry, as only Jerry can, at least after the game. And again, part of this is because you never want to bag as an owner or coach on your starting quarterback. Jerry was very like, I'm only looking at that last drive. Ed, you and I look at the total picture of a game. And in the Cowboys winning 27-23, you can't tell the whole story. Obviously, he pulled it out, but the interceptions, the inaccuracy, not just the interceptions. I mean, I'm talking about wide open receivers, either throwing it behind them or throwing it where they had to go to the ground to make the catch. This was not one of Dak Prescott's cleanest efforts of the past few years.
Yeah, I think, arguably this was the poorest game the Cowboys have played this season, and it was against the worst opponent on their schedule. So very timely in that sense. The Cowboys have the most lopsided win of the year in the NFL, beating Minnesota by 37 points. They've scored the most points of any team in a single game, 54 points. And today, they narrowly averted suffering the biggest upset this season and one of the worst ever as a 17-point favorite. But ultimately, they overcome their own incompetence and a fourth-quarter deficit in a game that comes down to, as you said, the final possession before they defeat a one-win opponent that's virtually certain to have the first pick in the NFL draft. And all it took was a goal line stand by the defense, making two plays inside their own 2-yard line to give the offense one more possession, and Dak Prescott taking that possession 98 yards. Before the 98-yard drive, kind of to your point, Dak had really struggled to complete passes downfield. He was just 4 for 18. That's 22% on balls thrown more than 10 yards downfield, not just in this game, but in the previous 2 games. And then in that last drive, he completes every pass except for the one Michael Gallup failed to hold when he got hit in the end zone for what appeared to be the game-winning touchdown. I know what you said. We heard what Jerry said about kind of forgiving the early first 59 minutes and, zeroing in exclusively on the last drive. And that's not what Dak said, right? In the press conference, you were just summarizing what Dak said, how irritated he is by his own performance in terms of putting the ball at risk. The 2 turnovers, although the second one was not his fault. And we'll probably talk about more of the injuries in this game. But Josh Ball, the right tackle, on 2 consecutive plays where Dak's throwing from around his own goal line, gets beat and lets Dak's passing arm get hit as he's trying to release the ball. And the second one was intercepted. The first one was a fumble. So twice Josh Ball creates a disastrous situation. Finally, the Cowboys coaching staff, aware of this as they witness it, take him out of the game and put Jason Peters, who's played exclusively on the left side since he's been here, really hadn't played on the right side, he said after the game, since 2005, winds up replacing injured Terrence Steele on the right side during that last drive, and Dak Prescott pulls it off.
Yeah, it was a masterful final drive. I think the throw of that drive, if we're looking at the best moment, was the one where he fit a ball in a tight spot, and Noah Brown made a really nice catch on it, but it was a gorgeous throw, and he was really tight on that deal. And again, the reason he had that opportunity is because of what the defense did in this game. Now, I just, to your point, Ed, the Dak Prescott, just moments ago, as we taped this, he finished up his news conference. As you know, Ed, we sometimes have to wait a little while for Dak. Had a nice kind of wide pinstripe suit on with a little lavender shirt, dress shirt tonight. Said, I'm damn not a fan of that. Talking about his interceptions, by the way. It's very, very frustrating. I've got to find a way to take better care of the ball. I'm not going to not be aggressive, but damn sure have to be smarter. It's something I promise I'll clean up. Now,
when is the question, right? When is the question?
Yeah.
This was his third game with more than one interception this season. Even though he's missed 5 games, he only did that twice all last year when he started all but one game. You know, he missed the Minnesota game and Cooper Rush replaced him because of the calf injury. But this is so uncharacteristic of Dak Prescott. And I think part of it is, as I said earlier, you know, he's facing more pressure in the pocket. They'll get Tyron Smith back, presumably next week against the Jaguars, but now they have an issue at the right tackle position and what they're going to do out there. Jerry said after the game, it's probably if Steele can't go and he's having an MRI on his knee tomorrow, and they didn't sound terribly optimistic about it being a minor injury. I think they are expecting the worst here, that Jason Peters could wind up being the right tackle. Which would be a pretty remarkable thing. I mean, great that they went and got depth early in the season, and then he creates an alternative there they otherwise would not have had. And I think the other part of it is, you know, Dak's receivers aren't as open as they used to be when he had Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb was his 2 instead of his 1. You know, I think the graduation of all the receivers up a spot in the absence of Amari Cooper is having an adverse effect on the quarterback. And that is why Jerry Jones is determined to make it work with Odell Beckham Jr. Even after all these times that he told us he had to get something big out of this year. And then we hear after he visits this week, Odell Beckham Jr. says, I'm 5 weeks away. And, I could probably play in the regular season, but why would I do that? And yet Jerry still wants this guy. That's why he owes it to his quarterback. They screwed up letting Amari Cooper go. They've created a bad circumstance for their quarterback. They put him in a position where it's very difficult for him to operate, protect the ball. I think that's why they're so determined to do whatever it takes to get Odell Beckham Jr., as Jerry said after the season. After tonight's game, didn't he say something about it's not over? And I say that with a big exclamation point or something.
Yeah, it's exactly what he said.
Right? Yeah.
We'll hear from Jerry here in a minute, and he hits on several areas. And that is one of them. And part of it is, Ed, I think it's embarrassing a little bit for an organization to fall all over itself and talk about receiver for like weeks. I mean, this story's going on for like a month and a half now. We're headed toward like 2 months talking about OBJ, and the thought of like, forget it. We're just moving on. It's like Jerry can't let go of this thing. I think he, quite honestly, I think there's part of this organization that would love for him to move on. And I even heard on your network this morning, ESPN, I think it was Matthew Hasselbeck, who was kind of suggesting that he thinks the other receivers have stepped up because of all this OBJ talk, that it served as sort of a motivational type deal. I don't know if that's true or not, but that was one of the things. And I thought it was interesting because you had one member of that ESPN preview show in Hasselbeck saying, hey, Dak's great. He can do whatever he needs to do. He's a great quarterback kind of thing. And you had Brewski, who is literally saying, no, he is a game manager. And if you have to throw him over 30 times, it's a problem. And I would say Brewski was right after today. I mean, I would lead in his direction because they threw 39 times, 2 interceptions, 1 touchdown, and it didn't go that well. Now, Ed, the first interception, that ball was, now I know some people are like, well, Noah Brown dropped that ball. Well, okay, just so we have the full story here, 29, one of the defensive backs for the Texans. By the way, Cowboys are kind of down in the secondary as well, but so are the Texans. I mean, these are not a lot of these guys are not their frontline guys. Now,
Derek Stingley didn't play the game today. Their number one pick was out at corner today.
Yeah, 29 tips that ball, and then 1 has the interception. And by the way, he had the interception on the ball where you were talking about earlier, where Dak's arm got hit, and the ball's kind of the ball was obviously underthrown, and the pick was made. I mean, these picks are happening in such bad places, though. It's either in their own red zone, it's in their own 10 to 20 yard line, or it's on the other team's red zone. It seems to be happening in those parts of the field. And again, there's no way you win this game today against a good team. I mean, you barely escaped this thing against the worst team in the NFL. I mean, this is a great tanking team, and yet there they were out trying, almost going to win this game today. Now, Ed, I do want, you mentioned it earlier, and we'll get to it. So I want to get Jerry and listen to some of what Ed referenced. And Jerry will talk about OBJ. He's very defensive of Dak, and so we'll get to this. I did want to also say, though, one other nugget on Marable Holmes, selected as one of the magazine's best builders. And, man, they don't just hand these things out. It's a really, really cool award or honor that they had. And then just to look at what they've done as far as these custom homes, I get to see these things going up, and I'm talking just gorgeous. And then, Ed, as I've said, they've got connections to the Murkison family, so they've got great connections to the Cowboys and that kind of thing. I've just been so impressed at the way they have unbelievable contractors that they use and people that have been with them for years. And people just, if there's any kind of issue, you can get a hold of the owner in a heartbeat, and he's always there showing up on site. So this is not one of these kind of custom home builders where it's like, how do we get a hold of this guy? People become great friends with him, and they stay with the Marables year after year. Okay, let's get into hearing from Jerry Jones. He had some very interesting things to say, and he was very, very protective of his quarterback. And also, we kind of clean up a little bit of injury news. And as Ed said, certainly not looking good for Steele over at right tackle. We'll see on Hankins. And then I can update you in a little bit on Trayvon Diggs, because I had an actual a close-up look at his thumb injury. Here is Jerry Jones speaking immediately after the game.
Are you disappointed?
I'm so proud of him. I know what I'm elated. Houston came to play, and they took everything. We took everything, and it was that kind of ball game, and it took that extraordinary effort. 98, 97 yards at the end, go down the field. But I want to give Houston all the credit in the world. They came to play defensively, and I thought their offense really challenged us all day long. Their quarterbacks played well.
Any update on injury-wise? Any injury update?
I don't have those updates. We're working on them. We'll have to wait till they come out here, because some of those are gray, and so I won't speak to them.
If you're without Terrence Steele, would you prefer to have Jason Peters stay at right tackle?
Well, again, it was good to see him out there since he hadn't done any work out there. But they told me that he hadn't ever played right tackle. I think he might have, but still, he came in there and did real well. And I was real proud of 75 too, really. It's coming for him. He's excellent athlete, excellent player, got a future.
Are the interceptions?
What can you say about the job Mike McCarthy has done this season? How much you're impressed with the job he's done?
I'm going to give you original quotes of what you are, what your record says you are. And but seriously, we know that's not mine. But I'm certainly proud of the job he's done, unquestionably. Never any more proud than the way we came back in the last seconds out there this afternoon and won this game. And that'll serve us well as we go forward from here. But to your direct question, it is great to get these back-to-back 10 wins. And Coach McCarthy has done everything to do with that. And so I'm proud for him, but I'm proud for these players. They deserve to have an ending like that, and they got it.
Jerry, you get the win, but does a performance like that scare you about what can go wrong for 60 minutes in the playoffs?
I know that there's 75,000 playing college football right this week, or this season, 75. There'll be 400 of them drafted. There'll be about 150 of them left after they're drafted. If they're on that football field, they're a good football player, and they can, as a team, beat you any day. Any NFL team can beat the other. And so I was, like everybody, dismayed that we were giving them some turnovers. We felt that was one way, but I want to give them credit. Their defense really played well and really gave us probably what that score indicates.
How concerned are you about the interceptions from Dak?
Well, I know what they were doing defensively, and he was seeing some things that give their coaching staff credit, but he was seeing some things that a little different for us. But that's neither here nor there. All my mind is on, totally, is that 98-yard drive to win the game. Hello, Dak Prescott. I know I'm being cute, or trying to be cute, but really that's what I'm looking at. Completely, that's what I'm looking at. I really wanted to see us come back with as much pressure as we could generate, which we managed to do that today. And to have him take the team down and let's have the win is meaningful to me in terms of being excited about what we got ahead of us.
Do you think they may have taken him too lightly?
What?
The Texans may have taken the Texans too lightly.
Well, I think their record of only one win would make anybody take them lightly, but that's the miscalculation. Shouldn't take them lightly. And they've got outstanding football players. We know every one of them. And those quarterbacks today look like they were Brett Favre, both of them.
Right.
And so all of it, they just, I don't have to point that out.
Right.
They gave us more than we wanted today. And we were fortunate to have that 98-yard drive. That took a lot of really fortitude, I think. And from that drive right there, I think we're a better team than when we entered the game.
The two quarterback system.
To see this team under pressure perform in that moment the way that they did today.
Well, I think anytime you get to live about it and can come out and get a chance to drive 98 yards with the game on the line, I think anytime you can live through that and have a positive result, you're better for it. So that's my impression.
Jerry, you mentioned Dak was seeing things he maybe hadn't seen yet. How would you describe that, especially given I think they got hands on 11 of his passes?
Yeah, they did a lot of zone and were mixing it up real good. And like I say, I want hats off to Houston and their coaching staff. They did a real good job, but they're basically their strategy as well as what they deployed out there. Had a lot to do with Dak's, any things that are negative about Dak's performance. But they had that out there too on that 98-yard drive, and he was able to step up there and win the game.
Do you worry that another team could use that formula to try and get Dak off his game again?
I don't worry about it because another weak team will use, if there's nuances in that, what they did out there to create problems for Dak and create problems for offense, we'll see it for sure. We'll probably see it next week. That's it. That's the way it works.
Yeah.
I don't mean to be cavalier, but that is what they do, what we do.
Yeah. Any update on Odell's situation? Have y'all moved on?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Period. Not at all, with a big exclamation point. That's it. And that's all I really want to say.
Okay.
You think the rotating quarterbacks kind of caught you guys off guard a little bit today?
I think their quarterback play, the way they deployed their quarterbacks, the way they basically were committed there to stop that run and could stop the run, did stop the run, and then to push us into making some throws that maybe we would like to have back. And I don't want to spend too much time on that. But we were well schemed, and we almost lost the game. But to our team's credit and Dak's, that 98-yard drive had everything going for them to win that ball game, and we won it. And I give Dak the credit, a lot of that credit for that 98-yard drive to be tried.
All right, Ed and Jerry went some different directions there. One of the things, and this goes back to Dak a little bit, that he admitted, okay, he was very protective or defensive, however you want to say that, of Dak, but he did admit that what the Texans did today confused him and seemed to indicate that it may have caught the Cowboys off guard. And when pressed to be a little more specific about it, he mentioned some of their zone coverage and some of the things that they did. And so he was asked, kind of like almost last year, or when was that, Ed, when they played Vic Fangio, Denver, is this going to be a blueprint for other teams? Very funny, by the way, that other teams would need the worst team in football to have a blueprint on how to stop Dak Prescott. But he said, yeah, I totally expect it. And I expect it next week for them to use what the Texans, and obviously Lovie Smith, their head coach, but he expects that the Jaguars to come out and other teams to do exactly what the Texans tried to do. Ed, not a great sign that year after year, we keep kind of finding some kind of blueprint that really seems to get inside Dak's head or game.
Well, I just think that the Cowboys, Kellen Moore seems to sometimes lose his sense of balance because, the Texans came into the game with the worst run defense in the NFL. Cowboys go right down the field on him running the football. And what a game by Tony Pollard or I don't know if it was a whole game, but he played exceptionally well when he got his opportunities and had a receiving touchdown and a rushing touchdown in a game for the first time in his career. He's now got 12 touchdowns, which is the most, which is one more than he had in his 3 previous NFL seasons combined. We know he's in a contract year, but just being down at the half the way they were. So it's a close game. And yet you look at the numbers and they've had 11 runs with Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard, and they've had 23 Dak Prescott passes. Just not right. And then to your bigger question about, Lovie Smith, hey, yeah, he did coach the Bears to a Super Bowl as a head coach, and he's been a highly accomplished defensive coordinator like Vic Fangio was. Where people laughed at him last year when he said, I know the blueprint. It's not that hard. You get up, you challenge the receiver. Now, that's not what the Texans did today. But Lovie Smith is a pretty good defensive strategist, even shorthanded like he was today. And I don't know that if I've ever seen a game that Dak Prescott played in where the defenders got their hands on the ball as many times as the Texans did in this game. It was really surprising to me the number of times they batted down his passes and, as you mentioned, twice picked him off. But I think the balance issue is the bigger thing. And obviously the Cowboys recognized it when they got in the locker room because it came out in the second half and ran like 9 consecutive plays to open the third quarter, and then really only threw the ball again because they got behind and were in a desperation mode at the end of the game. But yeah, the offense just has not looked to be in a rhythm. And we talked last week about the reputation they had under Jason Garrett. This team had under Jason Garrett about playing down to the level of competition. And for 3 quarters, they did that last week against the Colts. And today they did it arguably for 4 quarters against the Texans. And next week they play the Jaguars. We might see some more.
The number, Ed, I heard after the game was they got their hands on 11 times. They either knocked down passes or at the line of scrimmage. So they will get their hands on a lot of balls. And then I know you were giving me a hard time, perhaps for making this a little bit too much about my alma mater, Baylor. But Jalen Petrie, the 2nd-round pick for the Texans, boy, if they ever are able to fill in around him, and of course, as you mentioned, they had their rookie cornerback out today. that was a headbanger's ball situation with Petrie. He was one of the greatest. He's one of the greatest players ever at Baylor, and the hitting he did. In fact, I think it started to get inside the Cowboys players' minds. I'm with you. I'm not saying that wasn't a drop by Schultz, but he was about to get tattooed and wasn't that interesting. It wasn't Petrie, but on the game-winning drive, it looked like the Cowboys had a touchdown to Gallup. And then another player for the Texans comes in, number 36. I mean, all these guys are like backups. None of these guys are starters. That would have been Jonathan Owens. And he comes in and just rocks. So I think the Cowboys, to a certain extent, were out physicaled in this game, Ed.
Which is surprising. And then, on the defensive side of the ball, they didn't. I don't think they had a sack in the game, I don't think they got one on the last series. So I'm pretty sure this is one of the few games this season where they didn't get a sack. They did create one turnover on the fumble. Donovan Wilson ripped the ball out as Dameon Pierce tried to spin away from him, and Trayvon Diggs recovered that. But the Cowboys lost the turnover margin today because of Kevontae Turpin's muff punt and the 2 picks. And you just don't often win a game playing as poorly as they did. So do you look at that and judge them for how poorly they played against a bad team? Or do you look at it like, well, they weren't playing their best and they still won the game?
Yeah, I think some people, are all my years with Galloway. The rally cry used to be, "Don't style point this, don't style point a win." But if you are a team that has big aspirations like this team does, and you come in and you almost get beat by the woeful Texans, I do think you kind of have to look in the mirror on some things. And I'll be interested. I know Jerry's tone. Boy, he was doing the whole a win is a win, that whole thing. But we shall see. And Ed, also from a defensive standpoint, Cowboys, there were some things that gave them trouble today. Throughout the year, they have had some issues against the run. And the Texans came out with a very interesting strategy, which was to rotate their quarterbacks almost on a series by series. And if you go way back, you'd have to go back to Craig Morton and Roger Staubach in the early 70s. The Cowboys did that. You just rarely see anything like this in the NFL. And Ed, I would say that it certainly part of it, of course, was they got the ball on one of those drives, the 26-yard line. But once the Cowboys opened the door, which I would say the moment the door opened was when the muff punt by Turpin, the rotating quarterback, I thought worked to the Texans. I thought it worked pretty well for them, actually.
My sense in watching it was that it was more of a situational strategy with the Texans, that, Davis Mills is their starting quarterback. They put him back in the starting lineup this week after pulling him for 2 games. And they brought in Jeff Driscoll for his running ability. They've been very stagnant on offense. They've really struggled. They're playing without their 2 best receivers, Brandon Cooks and Nico Collins, today. And so I think they were just trying to figure out a way to create some more plays. And by bringing in the element of a quarterback who can run, they thought maybe that would create some opportunities. And I think it did. I think it did work well. So I think in red zone situations, Driscoll was in there quite a bit. And it seemed like in short yardage, he was in replacing Davis Mills in those types of situations. And, around the goal line on that final series, if they score the touchdown there, the game's probably over. And the Texans probably win. I thought they really missed Dameon Pierce. He sprained his ankle and he came back and he had 1 carry for like -2 yards, and they were just never quite the same again. And, then it looked like Driscoll kind of got mixed up, or maybe it was Rex Burkhead who got mixed up on that play. He turned to the left. It looked like he wanted to give him the ball on that side. It wasn't there. Then he pivoted and tried to run to his right and got stopped on the pivotal defensive play. But it just seemed like they were never right again after Dameon Pierce left the game. So I think that was kind of a pivotal moment. But yeah, I think the quarterback, using 2 different types of quarterbacks created some confusion and some challenges that the Cowboys and Dan Quinn didn't quite expect.
I like by the way, the Fox kind of will have a Dan Quinn cam. Occasionally during games, we will see the coordinators, but they'll kind of go up there in the booth with Dan and they'll show a little bit of that. Now, Ed, sometimes, and you've said this to me on occasion, you've said, Matt, light beer just doesn't do much for me. But Ed, then there's Miller Lite. If you're one of those people who want their light beer to taste like, actual beer, Miller Lite is light on calories, but not taste. Because what's the point of having a beer if you can't taste it? Lots changed over the years, and nobody wants to get full and like, oh my gosh, let's have a bunch of these heavy beers. Miller Lite, you get the full-bodied taste without that uncomfortable, heavy feeling. And Ed, from a personal standpoint, when we talk about our best times ever with Miller Lite, I mean, Galloway comes to mind for me because that's a guy that's the first name I think about when I think of Miller Lite. Ed, it wouldn't shock me if perhaps you shared in all your years of covering Troy Aikman, maybe you shared a Miller Lite with Troy, although he has his own beer now. What's your favorite Miller Lite, like personal experience? Does it go back to Galloway? Does it go to Aikman back in the day? When you think Miller Lite, what comes to mind?
Well, as may have been the case when you were on the Cowboys beat, Tim Calishaw and I were on the Cowboys beat in the 90s when they were winning 3 Super Bowls in 4 years. And whenever you went on the road with Randy Galloway, your first obligation upon retrieving your rental car was to stop at the nearest convenience store and make sure the Dallas Morning News star columnist and our good friend Randy Galloway had multiple Miller Lights from which to choose during the evening's recreational activities. And so those are also my memories of Miller Lite. Randy is always involved in those.
Yeah, and I can remember outside the radio station, they would make some deliveries from time to time. Barry Andrews and his gang. To get Miller Lite delivered right to your door, visit MillerLite.com/Doomsday. Okay, and that's like a / I think on that. Or you can find it pretty much anywhere that sells beer. Celebrate responsibly. Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 96 calories and 3.2 carbs per 12 ounces. Let me say that again. Celebrate responsibly. Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. All right, Ed, we have some closing thoughts, but before we do that, let's hear. He's been all over this quarterback. Some people thought he was too harsh. But I think he's kind of, today at least, I think maybe he was on to something. Let's see what kind of grades Glenn Stretch Smith has in store for us in a winning effort for the Cowboys, but also kind of a rough effort. Here is our stretch plays with Glenn Stretch Smith. All right, and as we start our stretch plays with former Cowboy scout and coach Glenn Stretch Smith. Also, you can see him on WFAA. Does a really nice job. He and Joe Trahan, Mike Leslie. He was all dressed up tonight, really preening there in the press box. I did want to say before we started with Stretch, thank you, Lakeside Roofing, family-owned, full-service roofing company serving the Dallas-Fort Worth area. The highest quality roofing products paired with the highest quality workmanship. Lakeside Roofing Company. And that website is lakesideroofco.com. And then on Twitter, it's at Lakeside Roof TX. Okay, great. I mean, what they do, unbelievable. And by the way, they work with Marable Homes, our presenting sponsor, in concert together and do some amazing things. Glenn Stretch Smith, we welcome him in this evening as he prepares for some of his TV work. We're fortunate enough to have him on the podcast. And Stretch, just moments ago, I had a chance to talk to Jerry Jones about, he was more interested in talking about what Dak did on that 98-yard drive to end the game. And that's Jerry, always half full, glass half full guy. but he did admit that the Texans did some things to really give Dak some problems on defense. And he does think that the Jaguars and others will use that as a blueprint moving forward. Walk us through, Stretch, what the Texans, he said it was something about playing some zone, and that seemed to give Dak a hard time. What did you see the Texans doing that seemed to trouble Dak?
Nothing. I mean, initially they lined up in what you would call an 8.5 or 9-man box in the very first series, in which Dallas took the football in about a 7 or 8, 9 play drive, went right down the field and scored on the sweep to Tony Pollard. After that, you saw Lovie Smith play Tampa 2 and cover 2, which is a defense that he knows. Now, I'll tell you this, that Dak likes to throw the ball in the seams, and it's hard to throw the ball in there when the Mike linebackers getting the kind of depth that he is. That's the reason they call it Tampa 2, is when the Mike linebacker gets depth and the safeties are wide. There's not any new defense coming out here. There's not some sort of Jack Crow 6'1" diamond that nobody's ever seen. It's not what you're seeing. So, yes, the linebackers did get some depth. Yes, they were playing some of the seam throws, which is obviously something that Dak, if he gets his hand on top of the football, he can throw those seam throws. But I don't think that this is something that is some sort of new defensive schemes that are being designed over there to say, well, let's see if we can confuse the Cowboy quarterback. They ran a zone drop at one time. I mean, zone drops have been in for a really long time. So I'm not sure what they're talking about, other than the fact that they stacked it up in there and we're basically going to say initially we're going to make the quarterback throw the ball. We're not going to let you run the football on us. And I think they got cut in that situation anyway, because, I mean, when you look at it, I mean, Pollard had in the very first series, Pollard had an outside zone run for 10 yards with 8.5 in the box. And Zeke had a zone cut for 25 yards. So I don't see anything that initially, other than a front, that you would say, well, boy, that's some sort of different look than Dak has ever seen. And then they played Tampa 2 and dropped the Mike linebacker out of there. So I'm not sure what they're talking about there, other than the first initial series, again, where you saw the 9 guys in there. You know, as we start looking at this, I mean, I thought Dallas was a football team that was not prepared to go out and play a team that they were 17-point favorites against. They didn't have, I mean, outside the first drive, I mean, I didn't see anybody really flying around. I didn't see a team that was really, really pressed to say you got to go play. And this is something in my mind that good teams have got to understand. And I'm going to tell you this, Matt. I mean, I don't know if you happen to see the halftime, but I mean, even Jimmy Johnson was almost disgusted at halftime, as if to say, if you go out and you fumble a punt and you throw interceptions, you're in the NFL. The others guys, those guys are professionals and they get paid too. And so what you saw Dallas do was let a team who really was ready to go dust off their golf clubs and think about what they were going to do this offseason, have a lead at the halftime and believe that they could do something with a 2-quarterback system where at times they were shuffling quarterbacks in and out of the game. It was something that I don't think I've ever seen. I mean, I got out of the football game and I was as disgusted as I've been in a long time. So the point I'm making is, I mean, it was really, in my mind, a team not ready to play. And I think that's what you saw was a result of that.
All right. As we start kind of hitting on some of these grades. Love Jack Crow reference. I remember him when he was at Arkansas. Man, then Jacksonville State later in his career, but the man coached for a lot of years. Jack Crow. Wow, what a name. In fact, Kenny Hatfield brought him in at Arkansas back in about 1989, as I recall. It is the Doomsday Podcast. Glenn Stretch Smith. Love to hear more at some point about a 6'1" diamond. Stretch, the quarterback, Dak, I got to say, I was hearing some things on the ESPN pregame show today that echoed some of the things you've said, some of your concerns about Dak. He was not particularly accurate today, had some interceptions. The one later, of course, he got his arm hit on that one. Again, we could always come up with some excuse. The earlier one, ball was tipped by one of their players, then went off the Cowboys receiver's hands and into the waiting arms of a player. What do you, when you kind of try to give a grade to Dak today, I mean, how much do we grade on a curve based on that great final drive? Because that's what Jerry's wanting to do. Where are you on this grade?
Yeah, I mean, you gotta give him credit for the throws in the last drive. There's no question about it. Just like I'm going to give him criticism for not making throws early in the football game, just like I'm going to point out his weaknesses, and I'm going to continue to point them out, his weaknesses throwing the football outside the numbers. You really don't have to be magna cum laude at Harvard to understand the guy doesn't like putting the football outside the numbers, and he's not accurate with it. And I think he knows he's not accurate with it. Now, you're going to say, well, the last throw that he threw, when he stepped in and he threw that, what I would call a sail or a 7 route to Noah Brown, was a dang good throw. I mean, he led the football outside. He turned the nose of the football into the window that it had to be versus cover 2, which when you run a hitch and then you run the inside corner, that's the window you want to put the football into. I think there are times when he guesses at what, and I'm talking about Dak, where he guesses at a coverage. And then there are other times when I think he absolutely almost, decides before the snap where he's going with the football. I think you combine all these things, and then he has a very lackluster F performance. And yes, I'll give him a D because of what he did on the last drive, but he put his football team in position to lose to the worst football team in the NFL. Don't make any mistake about it. This team in Houston is bad. They are bad. And the thought that you had to fight your ever-loving ass off just to win the football game, I think should be frustrating, and it should be maddening to any Cowboys fan. So I'm gonna give him an F, and then you're gonna come in and say, Stretch, he kind of had that last drive, and I'm gonna say, okay, he made a couple throws from Mosley. I'm gonna give him a D, and that's it. I'm not giving him anything better than that.
I thought I might be able to give you up to about a C-, but the D from Glenn Stretch Smith. Now, Stretch, ball gets beat. He had to come in and play some right tackle. There were some bad moments there that allowed them to get in there and get the pass rush on Dak. We're going to see what happens when Tyron Smith comes back. But what do you think of the overall performance of the offensive line? I mean, I think it was obvious to a lot of us in the first half. It was very strange that the running game was averaging 6.5 yards a carry, yet they asked Dak to throw it 23 times. I mean, sometimes you got to kind of ride what's working, and it didn't really seem like Kellen Moore was doing that.
Well, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to keep saying it. If you are going to rely on the quarterback to throw the ball 40 times a game, the Cowboys are not going to win. I'm going to go back to the offensive line. I thought the offensive line played really pretty well. Now, yes, there were some pressures off of that right side when Steele went out. That's kind of expected, and they helped him at times with the back and chipping out. And so I didn't see a lot there. I think the thing that encouraged me was is Malik Collins, who played really well, former Cowboy, played really well inside at tackle for the Texans on that last drive. I mean, they blew his butt about 6 yards back into the end zone. I thought the Dallas offensive line was physical. I thought they played well, and they really played well enough to win the football game for you. I gave the offensive line a B. I also gave the tight ends a B. I hated that Schultz dropped that seam ball early in the football game, but I thought overall the tight ends played pretty well and blocked pretty well. The running backs, to me, really played hard today. I thought they ran and finished runs well, ran routes well. I gave them as well a B. I'm a little concerned about the other thing that concerns me is from a receiver standpoint. I'm seeing guys that can get open, but for whatever reason, there's times when it looks like there's a lot of gray area in some of the routes that they're running. And I think CD is a really great, they like to run those deep overs, but the depths, they've got to clean that up, and they've got to try to do that in order to help the quarterback. And so, I gave the receivers a B-, but obviously I'm concerned about, I didn't like the drop on the slant with the new guy that they just put back in there, who at Washington. To me, you can't drop that football. He got it stuck on him. I would like to have seen Gallup hang on to that ball down there in that very tight area where he got popped in the end zone. Now, he did hang on to that hole shot throw that he got, and so I gave the receivers a B-. The rest of the team a B, the rest of the offense a B, and then obviously, and you can say I know I take some heat at times for being difficult on Dak, and let me clarify. I mean, I only have one point of reference for the NFL, and that's a Hall of Fame player in Troy Aikman. But I'll say this: if you're going to be an NFL quarterback, you've got to be more consistent and more accurate with the football than what Dak has been. And it's frustrating for me to continue to watch it week after week after there were times, and there were times when I've tried to make excuses for him coming back from injury. The bottom line is he is not accurate with the football, and that's something that they need to clean up.
All right, Stretch, really good stuff. Quickly, on the defensive side of the ball, they did get gashed at times in the run game. Driscoll comes in and gives them a different look as a running quarterback. And so that was an interesting decision by the Texans. Well, they threw everything at the Cowboys, and it almost came away with the win. This was a secondary that Diggs had to leave the game for a little while. You got Bland, you got Joseph out there. I mean, at one point you had a lot of inexperience out there in the secondary. Wilson made a couple of big plays in this game. Hooker, who you like, he did get trucked one time, just got absolutely run over by Damian Pierce. Walk through the different facets of the defense for me from a grade standpoint.
I'm going to point out a couple of guys really three guys that I thought played really, really well. I'm seeing a lot of good things out of Van Der Esch. I mean, he is chasing the football. He is reading and recognizing what's going on. I think that's a big time plus. I saw Clark made some big time plays. I like how he runs. Odigizua, I thought played really, really well. And then, you mentioned Hooker gets run over. You know what? When you come up and a guy's got a two-way go, you think he's either go in or out, and then he bows his neck and runs you over. I don't really, I'm not going to ding a guy for that. I thought that was pretty, it's one of those things that could just happen to you. I thought defensively this team played really well. I mean, you're going to give up some runs. You're going to, the zone read gives Dallas some issue from time to time, and I think that's something that you're going to see the Eagles will come in here and try to exploit. It'll be interesting to see how Dallas reacts to that. But I thought when you looked at a secondary that had to play some guys, that like you were saying that we hadn't seen in there. I just thought overall they played really well, and I say that because I think that this team. I am going to just say it the way it is and the way I see this, and that is, Matt, this team, if they're going to go deep into the playoffs, this team is going to have to win with defense, period. It ain't going to be offensively. It as much as everybody wants to say, boy, we'd like to see we'd like to see 35 points and we'd like to see them go out score and we'd like to see it ain't going to be that way. The best football player on the team, we said it before we started and we agreed on it. Go ahead and you tell them who you think the best football player on the team is.
Micah Parsons.
Absolutely. And that's who they're going to have to win with. And so that side of the football is going to have to continually give you the effort they did today. Now, were they flying around? Were they playing as hard? I mean, we can sit here and talk about all that if we want to. I just think that this team, if they're going to win in the playoffs, is going to have to win defensively. It ain't going to come from the offensive side of the ball. That's just how it is. And so I'm going to continue to say that I like how this defense, to me, continues to get better week after week. And some of the players who we didn't anticipate producing the way that we thought they should are given production. I mean, I got to go all the way around and give the defense a B+ today. I thought they played really well and did some things that I like.
All right. And Lawrence made some big plays behind the line of scrimmage. The sack totals weren't there today, but still some of the plays they made, they preserved they bought enough time finally for Dak to kick it in at the end of the game and go win the football game. And there is something to be said for winning the game. Otherwise, we would be talking about a very embarrassing loss to the Houston Texans. And this is a game that means a lot to Houston fans. Okay. It doesn't mean that much to Cowboys fans, but boy, it would have been embarrassing to lose this game. And boy, Lovie Smith saying some very kind things about Dak, but I agree with you. I mean, it was not a good effort today overall. And quite honestly, Stretch, game after game, when he does this, he says all the right things. And there's so many great attributes that he has, but it doesn't really matter what you say after a game or before a game or during the week. It's how you play between the lines, those 60 minutes. And sometimes that seems to be a struggle. It is the Doomsday Podcast. It is Glenn Stretch Smith. Let me encourage you to watch Stretch every Sunday night at 10:30 on that sports special. Of course, Joe Trahan and Stretch will tee it up tonight, and they'll talk about it on TV. Stretch, thank you, sir.
Mosley, time for a Miller Lite. Have yourself a great evening.
That's always a good thought. I'll do that. That is Stretch Place with Glenn Stretch Smith on the Doomsday Podcast. All right, it is the Doomsday Podcast. Thanks to Stretch there. And as we kind of look ahead a little bit, Ed, Cowboys go to Jacksonville. Then we'll be back here on Christmas Eve in what should be a showdown with the Eagles. I mean, I think if you're going to try to be positive about something like this, you would say that maybe you'd rather like a narrow win get your attention than maybe a narrow loss. Like losing to the Texans would have been very embarrassing. Okay. Escaping with the win, not as embarrassing. Do you see, Ed, I think you kind of looked at both sides of this thing earlier in the podcast. Do you see a couple of maybe positives that can come from something like this?
Well, I think the fact that they won the game is not insignificant, especially, as they stand relative to the Eagles, and that being a meaningful game on Christmas Eve. As much as everybody's looked forward to it, had they lost today, the Eagles won, it would have essentially clinched the division for the Eagles. As it is, I think winning the game, but almost losing kind of gets their attention. I think depending on how some of these injuries shake out, they're going to get Tyron Smith back. I assume he'll play next week. He's practiced all this week, although they weren't in pads. I assume Mike McCarthy wants some padded practices this week, and we'll get Tyron Smith ready to play. What happens at right tackle remains to be seen, but at least they have a veteran option in Jason Peters there. Sounds like Tyler Smith, the rookie, is not going to go anywhere but at left guard. He's not going to get kicked out to right tackle. And I think the other thing that gets your attention if you're the Cowboys and you don't look past anybody now because of the experience you just had, and even more than that, hey, don't forget, the Jaguars today beat the Tennessee Titans, who are leading their division. And Trevor Lawrence, a former number 1 overall pick, had 368 yards and 3 touchdowns passing. And the Cowboys are short at corner right now. I mean, at one point today, when Trayvon Diggs went out, they were down their top 3 corners because Anthony Brown's on IR and Jordan Lewis is on IR. Kelvin Joseph gave up a couple big catches, made a few plays. He's going to get challenged next week. And then I think the other thing not to forget about the Jaguars is that Doug Peterson, their head coach, coached the Eagles for several years, won a Super Bowl. So he's been in the NFC East. This is a team, an opponent he knows better than most.
I like it. I like the Peterson angle, a man that has been on the Doomsday podcast. And I think that was in the months after they won the Super Bowl. And
might have been our very first guest. I think he might have been our very first guest.
It was pretty early on, and he was attending like one of his kids' baseball games or something.
Correct. That's correct.
And he was on with us. You're right. We might have been taping that at some kind of small studio over at Swiss Avenue or something. I don't know. We had some interesting times there in the early days, but here we are all these years later as the Cowboys, as Ed detailed earlier, improved to double-digit wins on the season, 10-3. Jacksonville next. This will be interesting. Ed, I teased this, so I didn't want to not pay the tease off. I had a look at the thumb of Trayvon Diggs, and he reached out and just showed it to me. And his thumb does look swollen, but obviously he was able to come back in that game. And then he had one of the craziest. I don't know, Ed, you know how sometimes we can, whoever does that stuff, next gen stats will tell us like how far somebody ran, like on that Micah Parsons thing a few weeks ago, maybe Thanksgiving. Right. I said, how far do you think you went, Trayvon, on that return? And he said he thought he went 100 yards.
Well, he was gassed. He gave himself up and he went to the sideline, right, of his own volition.
And in his little visit with me, Ed, he said that I don't usually do this, but I'm not going to lie to you. Those 2 dudes, as I got, was on the sideline, it looked pretty big. And so I went ahead and stepped out. So anyway, the Cowboys escape 27-23. And it is the Doomsday podcast. And we love doing this with y'all. Ed, tremendous work by you today. And for Frito Nation Productions, I should also thank Jim and Sally Nation, the use of their post-game suite. Oh, man, love coming up here on that silver level. It's just a gorgeous view of the stadium. Jana King out here cleaning up the stadium, doing a great job. But we will be back with you tomorrow. Ed, this is a rare, correct
tomorrow?
Me if I'm wrong.
We're going to be back tomorrow?
No, I meant next week. But
special edition podcast?
I'm fine with that. But is this 2 noon starts in a row?
Yeah, wow. I think they did. Didn't they do that earlier this year too? And maybe that was some of the Cowboys malaise. I mean, when you're a bad team, you play a lot of noon games. The Texans play almost exclusively at noon. The Cowboys, are 10-3 and the most visible team in the league. They're used to playing at 4:30 or prime time. So maybe that accounts for their malaise. But next week, they're going to have to face the same challenge in terms of the start time because it'll be 1:00 Eastern. And as we were doing the podcast, the Doomsday podcast, my text came in from Seth Markman, my boss at ESPN. I've been assigned the game next week, so I'll be live and in color and loud as ever from Jacksonville.
You should tell Seth, an old friend of mine too, that you are now covering the Colorado Buffaloes, and you will not be able to take on that assignment. You will reunite
Prime time.
Deion Sanders and whatever the nickname Randy, we won't get into that, once gave him. Okay, it is the Doomsday Podcast for Frito Nation Productions and Mark Frito Friedman and Ed Werder. It is Matt Mosley signing off from AT&T Stadium. Good night, everybody.
Hey, it's Mark Goodman.
And I'm Alan Light.
On today's podcast, Record Store Day founder Carrie Colleton is joining us to discuss the April 20th RSD special releases.
Plus, we'll talk live with our audience, the Sound Up Pod Squad, and find out who still listens to vinyl. And some updates from the Beatles universe.
Oh, good. Sound Up with Mark Goodman and Alan Light, the only music podcast that matters. Get it on Pandora, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.